Gee, things quieted right down here. I thought I was gonna have to give my cow call. I'm very happy this evening to introduce our guest speaker, Sam Glaze Corcoran. She's a professor at UMass Amherst in agronomy. She's also a plant biologist by training and soil scientist by practice. And that's what you're going to be practicing with us tonight. She teaches botany for Stockbridge School. She develops soil health programs for UMass Extension. And her work ranges from manure management, which is something I have a lot of experience in, and on dairy farms. And more lately, he's been working growing butternut squash on the solar panels. So that probably won't get into our topic tonight.
We will not.
We had a very interesting discussion, and with no further ado.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to turn this off because I am incredibly loud. If at any point you can't hear me, let me know and I will turn it back on. So thank you again for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. If I start to go over time, somebody just flag me down and I will start to cut things live time. But okay, so as Steve mentioned, I usually work in manure and soil health and these solar panels. So at UMass, I'm a part of the Extension crop, dairy, livestock, and equine team. And if your first response is, wow, that's a lot, yes, that is everyone's response. And so when one of my colleagues on the Extension veg team, called me up and was like, hey Sam, we have this request, do you want to do this presentation? I was like, yeah, absolutely. I've done some no-till research, I'm a no-till gardener. I'm like, let's do it. I'm like, what's the audience? She goes, vegetable farmers. I was like, wow, it's a lot harder on vegetable farms than it is on dairy farms that are growing a lot of silage, which is who I usually work with. And I think that's a good place to approach this from my viewpoint is what systems are these harder in? What systems does no-till make a little bit more sense in? And then where are the trade-offs as we look at something like a veg system versus these field crops? So today, some of my examples are going to be from field crops. That's just where actually a lot of the research is in, but I promise I will loop it all back around to vegetables. Okay, so when we talk about tillage, there's a reason we use tillage, right? But people have different concepts of what tillage is and why we do it. So from my knowledge, if you are a farmer, like for a living, can you raise your hand? All right, and if you are a non-farmer, a gardener, just a public citizen interested, can you raise your hand? Okay, great. I'm going to try to capture both audiences tonight. For the farmers, you can tune me out for this slide. Everybody else, you can tune in. So what is tillage? Tillage, by definition, is a soil management practice that turns and mixes the soil. And there's a lot of reasons that we use tillage. So one classic example is if you want to convert sod, lawn, or hayfield, and you see that happening here with the famous moldboard plow. And this is what we are going to consider to be conventional tillage. The grass here is being completely inverted, completely flipped upside down, and it exposes the soil, okay? So we also use tillage to introduce oxygen into the soil or aerate it, to loosen the soil so that roots can penetrate, and to control weeds, right? To kill them as they start to germinate. Tillage is also used for warming and drying the soil. So this is a picture I took yesterday. I am everybody's nosy neighbor, and I want to know what everyone's doing in their yard or their farm. And this field had been disked earlier that morning, and you see the steam rising off of it. And so what's happening is the residue that was on the soil surface gets incorporated into the soil, and oxygen enters the soil. And then the same way a compost pile steams because of decomposition, This field is steaming because of that decomposition and the introduction of organic matter. So this also helps to warm and dry the soil. For farmers in New England, where our season is short and it's cold, this can be really beneficial for folks to get into the soil earlier in the season. Very important for manure incorporation. So when we smell manure, what we're smelling for the most part is ammonia. Ammonia is a gas at room temperature. When we incorporate manure into the soil, it really limits that ammonia coming off of it. And so our ability to incorporate manure is very important. We also use this to incorporate fertilizers, and especially lime. So who in here has limed their garden or their fields at some point? Oh, if your hands are not up, I'm worried about your garden, okay? New England soils naturally gravitate towards being acidic. Most people need lime. If we surface apply lime, that's going to have most of its effect on the top 1 to 2 inches, and it's going to be relatively slow. If we incorporate lime to increase our pH, it's going to have an effect to the depth that we incorporate it. So if that's 4 inches or 6 inches, and it's going to be faster. Oh, and there we go. There's your lime. And then we also use this tillage to manage crop residues. So this could be from your cover crop, or this could be from your cash crop, and to prepare a nice, clean seed bed. A good seed bed that you can plant into, especially when you are using a tractor, is really important. Seed to soil contact is everything. So the ability for your implement to get through there and have good seed germination is very important. So we've talked about all of these reasons why tillage is good. Why are we talking about no-till? Well, for that story, you have to go all the way back to 1935 and the Dust Bowl. And at the time, in response to the Dust Bowl, the United States founded what was called the Soil Conservation Service, modern-day Natural Resource Conservation Service. And this was the first time that we really started to understand that there is a difference between dirt and soil. Okay, dirt is something you beat up and you don't appreciate. Soil is a resource that we want to take care of and conserve. And at the time, the Soil Conservation Service was not thinking about no-till, but if you flash forward about 80 years, they started thinking about no-till with modern NRCS. So in 2012, NRCS founded what is called, or their program that they called Unlocking the Secrets of the Soil. And it wasn't as if in 2012 we started to understand no-till. Actually, a lot of the no-till research started in the 70s. A lot of it started out of Virginia Tech. I don't know if you know Virginia Tech, but they're no dummies, okay? And so after about 40 years of no-till research, NRCS came up with this program and what they call the 4 tenets of soil health. And so of these 4, right here is minimize disturbance. So that's no-till, okay? And then they also introduced maximizing soil cover. Doesn't have to be necessarily living, right? For this parameter, it's just maximize soil cover. It turns out if you have residue on your surface, even if it's not living residue, mulch, crop residue, it significantly reduces the likelihood of both rain and wind erosion. They also advise maximize continuous living roots. So continuous living roots also covers this soil cover benefit. Why living roots? Well, plants are really leaky. So they do photosynthesis and they release sugars out of their roots. When they do that, they attract a microbial community. And we have come to understand that soil is living, that it has these microbes in it. And if we feed and take care of those microbes, which living roots do, that contributes to soil health, it contributes to soil structure, it contributes to making nutrients more available. And then the 4th tenet is maximizing biodiversity. For some people, that means incorporating livestock. For other people, that means more crop rotation. So I do want to take a beat before we get into no-till and talk about cover crops. Cover crops are tremendously important on both tilled and no-till systems. So if you're not familiar, a cover crop is a crop that we plant when the soil would otherwise be bare. It is not intended necessarily to be a cash crop. And so here this is a field of rye, wheat, and triticale, experimental plots at UMass. And if you look in the dried rows or in the control plots, these are all spring weeds, right? And so with this overwintering crop, we've had amazing spring weed suppression. We've had ongoing soil cover since the previous fall, and here we are in May. So I'm getting soil cover and living roots and increasing biodiversity. Here we see a picture of grain corn drying down, and then they planted clover in the dry row in between to minimize that exposed soil. So as we think about no-till today, keep in mind, cover crops hit all three of these things, okay? All right, now I'm gonna tell you what I tell my students. Please don't glaze over when I put this up. If you hang tight with me, I promise this graph will not suck, okay? So what are we looking at? This is a study, this is a 31-year study done in the United States, and what they're showing you is these black dots up top, that's no-till. On all of these graphs, that's no-till 31 years. These white triangles, that's tillage, okay? Conventional tillage, mold-borne plow. On this top, we're looking at soil carbon. On the bottom, we're looking at soil nitrogen. This is where they added no nitrogen for 30 years. This is 34, it's in kilograms per hectare, it's about pounds per acre. Nitrogen each year, 67, 101, okay? So then they looked at vetch, which is a legume, wheat, and no cover crop. Even when there's no cover crop, okay, if it's no-till, we see soil carbon is higher with the no-till system, okay? But in general, it doesn't matter if you're looking at vetch or wheat, we always see these black dots higher, right? There's a little bit of variation here, but black dots always higher. So with no-till, we're always finding more soil carbon, we're always finding more soil nitrogen. What is going on there? And so this comes back to a question that comes up quite a lot is, should I be incorporating my cover crop or not? And it turns out what's happening, when we incorporate our cover crops into the soil, we're tilling our soil. When we till our soil, we're introducing all of that oxygen along with that carbon in those crops. Microbes go nuts with all that oxygen, all that food. They start to do a ton of decomposition. And all of the carbon that has been buried deep, 4, 5, 6 inches down, gets flipped and exposed to the top of the surface. And now that surface carbon can also start to leave. Because as microbes break things down, just like when your body breaks things down, when you respire, okay, you're releasing carbon. So when you lose weight, where does it go? Who can tell me?
CO2 and water?
Yeah, CO2 and water. It does not come out the back end when you are losing weight. That's what most people think. It's you are breathing, right? It's cellular respiration. The same thing is happening with microbes. And so it turns out if you actually leave the residue on the soil surface, those leaky roots, remember, up to 30% of the photosynthesis products from plants, sugars, come out of those roots. So those roots and those microbes, that is what is really building our soil carbon in the long term. So to incorporate or not to incorporate, if your focus is on soil health and soil carbon, don't incorporate your cover crop. I know it seems counterintuitive. So as we build soil carbon, we start to see soils that look like this. This is a no-till soil. This is a tilled soil. We see two things going on. One, this is very dark soil. Carbon and soil organic matter makes soil dark. So we can visually see that there's a lot more carbon in this soil. We also start to see our aggregate stability change. So these are all aggregates. When you pick up a handful of soil, all of those little balls are aggregates. What we see here is we have more large aggregates. Don't be tricked into thinking these tiny little pieces are individual soil particles. They are not. They are just very teeny tiny aggregates. And when we have more big aggregates, we end up with more soil porosity, or more pores in our soil, where microbes can live, where water can infiltrate, where roots can grow through. And so this starts to contribute to the physical properties of soil and soil structure. When we use tillage, 1, we break down carbon, which is really important for building aggregates. 2, we break down aggregates. And so if you actually go ahead, I know another chart, don't worry, there won't be too many. If you look at aggregates, okay, this is a no-till aggregate, all these dark black lines. These are different sizes of aggregates, so these are big aggregates, These are little aggregates. We find a lot more carbon actually inside of those aggregates, okay? So an aggregate has carbon, it has residues from bacteria and fungi, it has calcium and magnesium in them, and then it has sand, silt, clay. So we're getting more carbon in those aggregates. If we also look at years since no-till adoption, after about 10 years, we can start to get maximum carbon sequestration in these soils. So again, if you care about, or if your focus is on things like climate change, carbon sequestration is a great benefit. But if you're more focused on yield, which is completely fair and legitimate, you start to see these other soil health benefits that we've been talking about. So this is a big one. If you look here on the left, this is a field that's been tilled. On the right, this is no-till. During a significant rain event, we find that we get better water infiltration on the no-till, and we see more ponding on the tilled fields. This is from a 10-year study in Switzerland on the bottom. Again, this is tilled on this side, no-till on this side. This is becoming of increasing importance for us here in New England because we are having less rain events, and they are more intense when we do have them. And so capturing that rain when we get rain is really important. One last point. This is a potato field that I went out and took soil samples in. A dairy farmer was taking it over and they were going to plant corn into it. Now, potatoes get a tough shake. I don't know how you're going to do no-till potatoes. But on top of this being a really heavily tilled field, they were not using cover crops very well. So again, this comes back to cover crops are a really important thing. We don't want to lose sight of that in the no-till world. And what you can see, this is my soil probe, which is about belly button high on me. And look how big this hillside is just sliding away, okay? This washout here that you see from the satellite view is this washout here. This is the Connecticut River, okay? And each one of these fields is between 15 to 20 acres. So this is a big deal when we're thinking about erosion and how we treat our soil. So is all tillage created equal? Again, this is going to be largely for the non-farmers in the room. We're going to do a crash course on tillage and farm implements. So this is the moldboard plow. This is kind of the kid that got the whole class in trouble. The moldboard plow, though, is brilliant agricultural engineering. It has essentially a blade and a scoop. And so it comes through and it cuts, scoops, and flips soil. And so the moldboard plow got itself in trouble because it leaves the least amount of residue on the soil surface. Because residue is important, that's why people have really been getting after the moldboard plow and the amount of soil disturbance that it causes. But for homeowners, if you have ever shoved in a shovel into your soil and flipped it over, congratulations, that is the equivalent of a moldboard plow. And it makes sense, right? It's our natural instinct to do that. And so I think from the public's perspective, we have to be careful when we pick on farmers, because I think this is, for many of us, the most natural thing to do when you go out and you're converting something like your lawn into garden space. So a quick tutorial on discs. This is called a disc plow or a disc ripper. These are discs here in the front. These are discs here in the back. This little piece here is what makes it a disc ripper. Okay, it may or not have that piece on it. And these discs, if you look, they're at an angle. And so the front discs are going one angle, the back discs are going another angle. Each disc is kind of like a pizza cutter that you put through your pizza, but not only are they a pizza cutter going through and cutting up residue on the soil surface, because these discs are at angles, they're dragging some of that soil with them, and that's going to create some horizontal tillage, okay? So when you start to get into farm equipment, is a disc, a disc, a disc, a disc? No, it's not. And so is all tillage created equal? So a disc plow would be considered pretty much equivalent to a moldboard plow in terms of soil disturbance. But if you get into a disc harrow and you say, well, Sam, these all have 2 rows of discs, well, this one is, in the front row, it's straight. You see that? The back one is offset. So this is just cutting, and then this one's going to cut and mix. It's also a lighter implement, so it's only going 5 to 8 inches deep in the soil. If you get into one of these shallow tandem discs, I mean, it looks almost identical to a disc plow, but again, it's so much lighter, it's only going about 2 to 4 inches deep in the soil. And then we get into vertical tillage, which is very shallow. By definition, vertical tillage, those discs are not at an angle. So they're not doing any soil dragging, they're just cutting up surface residue. These are all really important tools for preparing a seed bed. Then we get into a rotary hoe. It's essentially a modified disc in a lot of ways. It has these little tines on it. This is used for in-season weeding. If you're a homeowner and you have anything that looks like this, all right, that's your equivalent of a rotary hoe. It is a form of tillage. Then we can get into our chisels. So this is a subsoiler here. And I mean, that's a bad layering, right? I mean, you look at this thing and I tell you that's going 15 to 20 inches deep. Raise your hand if you think it's good to go into the soil 15 to 20 inches deep. I see 2 hands, A+, A+. This is actually a really important tool for breaking up very deep compaction. In fact, the very compaction that many years of tillage can create. And many people will use a subsoiler before converting into no-till because it makes it easier for really deep root growth, really deep water infiltration. So you cannot judge a plow by its cover. And if you look at what it's doing to the soil, I mean, look at what this disc did to the soil, right? It cut it up and it mixed it. This subsoiler, good subsoiling, you will barely even be able to tell that it went through that field because it's meant to work at a very deep depth. It's not about surface tillage. So here we see a chisel plow, right? These are the chisels. And it's going through and it's just ripping and dragging through that soil. So this is not cutting up and incorporating our residue very much. It's still going to leave a lot of residue on the soil, which is good, we like that, but it's going to give us some compaction alleviation. And then on the far right side here, this is a cultivator. This is going to be used commonly for bed finishing or bed prep. Again, it comes to getting just a nice, smooth seed bed that you can go through with your equipment. Again, for my gardeners, if you have anything that looks like this, okay, that is a tillage implement in your garden. 2 more tillage pages, we're getting through it, all right? So, but there's a lot, right? So when we say no-till, what do we really mean? So here's a rotary tiller, all right? This is the homeowner's version of rototiller. It's gonna go 4 to 6 inches deep. This is a chain harrow, so this is something that you can just drag through the field to move residue, or again, nice smooth seed bed. We keep talking about that, it's really important. Here's a tine harrow or a tine rake. Okay, this is used for in-season weeding. This is a wonderful tool for both no-till and tilled systems. It's only going to go about 0 to 1 inch deep because it's meant to get weeds off the surface. So again, home gardeners, if you have anything that looks like this, all right, that's your equivalent of a tine weeder or a tine rake. So then we get into these concepts of conservation tillage or reduced tillage. So first of all, it would be fair to say that shallow tillage is reduced tillage. So if you're disking, but you're using one of these little guys, that's reduced tillage compared to this big guy. And so then we throw in also terminology like strip till or zone till. What that refers to is only tilling the area that you're actually going to plant in. And so that's what's going through right here. It doesn't tell me are you going to use a disc, it doesn't tell me are you going to use a chisel. All it tells me is you are going to only till where you are going to plant. And so for this, they're probably going to come back through and plant some sort of grain like wheat here. But the vegetable equivalent is permanent beds, all right? So you never till or disturb your driveways or your walkways, depending on your system, and you have permanent beds, and any tillage you do, you limit to those permanent beds. Then we also find ridge tillage. This is really common in potato production. And so you form a ridge, and then these are your potatoes. You want to leave your residue down here, okay? Again, we like residue, we like covering the soil. And then when it rains, any rain that runs off gets caught in this little swale here, and it gives it more time to infiltrate and to capture more water. So this isn't reduced tillage by any means, but it would be considered conservation tillage. If you're overwhelmed, I get it, right? I mean, it's a lot of information. And I kind of intentionally want to overwhelm you a little bit to make the point that is all tillage created equal? No, it is absolutely not. And unless you have a really keen eye and you're a nosy neighbor and you're looking at what a farmer is doing, it's really hard to know what kind of disc they're using or what kind of angle they're at from the road. And so we would consider no-till to be the least amount of disturbance, but here's a bunch of things like a subsoiler, that bad Larry that goes 30 or 20 inches deep, that's reduced tillage. Okay, rotary tillers, 2-inch disc plow or chisel plow, all reduced tillage. So when a good point here is when we're talking about going to no-till, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good or the enemy of better than it was. Reduced tillage is still a great thing. Permanent beds or zone tillage is still a great thing if going all the way no-till is too much. Okay, so no-till is just exactly what it sounds like, where we are not going to disturb the soil at all. This makes a lot of sense for certain crops, like our apple orchards, our hay fields, our pastures, our cut flowers, right, our perennial cut flowers. These systems lend themselves to no-till, right? It's a very easy fit. I don't think these systems get enough credit for the value that they do provide in the no-till world. But when we come over and start to talk about no-till in field production, we're leaving all our crop residue on the surface, and we are seeing this really increase in popularity amongst the big field crops, okay? So this is the corn producers. For silage corn, that's where you harvest the entire plant, you chop it up, you feed it to cows. For grain corn, for wheat crops, and for soybeans. And we'll come back in a minute to why this is getting more popular for pumpkins and winter squash. And so there's a lot of engineering going into these systems to make this work for these farmers. There is work going in for the vegetable farmers as well. So we see things like no-till transplanters, which are specifically designed to work in a no-till high residue system. The fact of the matter is, in a high residue system, that residue can clog up your planter if it is not designed to work in a no-till system. And so this is an example of a planter that is designed to work in a no-till system. Very expensive. Okay, so if you already have all of your equipment for a no-till or for a tillage operation, the cost of these can be cost prohibitive, and I think we have to acknowledge that. Here what you're seeing is a manure injector. And so we said, okay, it's really important to incorporate manure. This is one way around that. This is injecting it directly into the soil. The caveat with this only works with liquid and semi-liquid manures. That's what we're going to commonly find on dairy farms or pig operations. But if you have a composted manure or you have a solid manure, this is not going to work for that purpose, and so those are still going to be left on the soil surface. There are trade-offs with no-till, and so if we go back to those field crops, again, I'm sorry, graph, okay, I think this might be my last one. These are the tillage events per year, okay, so 0 tillage events, 5 tillage events, 10 tillage events. This is how much herbicide is used. As farmers are using less tillage, they're using more herbicide. This is not a commentary one way or the other, and again, this is an agronomy crops, okay? So soybeans have been developed to be used with herbicide. Corn has been developed to be used with herbicide. These systems are really conducive to no-till because they have this herbicide tool in their arsenal. This is not a commentary on is herbicide good or bad, it is just a trade-off to consider. So that was one of the findings of this study. One of their other findings was you can't just go no-till without managing your weeds somehow. So what do, right? Especially if you don't want to spray or you can't spray. So this is probably one of the biggest things in research right now, and I think it's a really good method for organic farmers especially. So this is a roller crimper, and this is rye. And from about now until mid-May, rye is going nuts, and it's getting really tall. And a roller crimper is basically a big, heavy, jagged rolling pin. And what happens is this rolls over the rye and it lays it flat. That's the roller part. The crimper part is if the rye is at the right growth stage, it can actually cut the rye at the base of the plant. And that's how this rye can be killed. Rye is super aggressive. So if you don't kill it, it's going to become a weed. A lot of people kill it with herbicide. So this is an organic way to kill rye. Again, some people still use it with herbicide, but you don't have to if you get it right. You can do this organically. Here is where that rye has been all killed. It's left straw on the surface, and pumpkins have been planted through no-till. And so here you go, this is now your in-season mulch and weed control. But does it always work? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So here's an example of organic soybeans, all right? They were planted into this really beautiful rye cover crop that has been roller crimped. But on the right, what we see happening is they planted soybeans at this farm. These soybeans were planted on the same day. But this rye cover crop was not big enough yet to be roller crimped. If you do it too early, you won't kill it, and it will be a problem. So they planted the soybeans, and then they roller crimped later. But the soybeans had already germinated. So in order to plant soy on time, they had to roller crimp over the beans, and they're really delayed coming up through the mulch here, and they're a little bit damaged, especially compared to their neighbor. So do we have things like roller crimpers that are great? Yes. Does it always work? No. There's a little bit of timing to getting this right. So here's an example in an organic system where they roller crimp the rye, and then they're coming through with a tarp to finish killing it, okay? And then they planted cabbage into it. Again, we see this nice residue left behind, good soil cover, good weed suppression. But this does start to introduce the question, how do we feel about increasing black plastic use in organic operations or in no-till operations? Again, it's not a commentary on is it good or bad, but it's another trade-off to consider. We have to replace one method like tillage with another method, and that might be using more plastic in these systems. So insects is something that comes up a lot when we talk about no-till. I was talking to some of my colleagues on the veg team that work in insects, and they pointed out that, and there's no pictures of insects on this slide because they make me kind of squeamy. Give me manure any day. But so there's a number of really important insects that we already know can overwinter in field edges. And the recommendations for farmers and gardeners are to clean up your field edges, clean up your weeds, clean up your residue, so that these insects, these pests, don't overwinter right in your field when they're there next spring. And so there is some evidence that, yeah, no-till systems, higher residue, all this mulch, all this cover crop, can increase some of these insect pests. That is a fair assessment. But what they've also found is that predators will increase as well, especially spiders. They found huge increases in field spiders associated with no-till. One is, yeah, they have more food to eat because there's more pests, but also spiders also overwinter in the soil and in that residue. And so there is a pain point to transitioning to no-till. The first couple of years, you might see your pest pressure increase, but if you give it time, the predators will also increase, and it starts to become a stabilized system where that increased insect pressure is no longer a big problem. So another question that comes up a lot with no-till, that again is a fair and legitimate point, is what about disease management? So on the left, what we see here is a bacterial leaf spot of lettuce. So we don't have as much trouble with bacterial leaf spot of lettuce here in New England, but we do have trouble with this pathogen on squash, for example, and on peppers, for example. And this is from, this is direct text from the Compendia of Lettuce Diseases. The compendia are like the Bibles of plant disease, okay? And here is their specific recommendation for this pathogen. Infested plant residues should be plowed into the soil to allow them to decompose before planting subsequent lettuce crops. That's the recommendation. That doesn't fit into a no-till system. That's a fair point. But then on the flip side, Phytophthora capsicum, which many of you are probably familiar with, can infect peppers, and it can infect cucurbits. We have a lot of trouble in the valley where I work with this infecting cucurbits. And it's this really wild pathogen. It's closely related to fungus, and they make these resting structures called oospores. And it's kind of like a cute little thing, but these guys can live in the soil for 20 years. 20 years, waiting for a host plant to show up. When the host plant shows up, it can start to infect. This is an incredibly aggressive pathogen, and it will wipe out your crop. But because this is a soil pathogen, if you can prevent the soil from splashing up onto your crop, you can prevent infection. And so what they recommend in the compendia as well, okay, different compendia, is splash dispersal of inoculum, so that's things like these spores, can be reduced by planting in beds mulched with straw or in the stubble of a no-till cover crop, such as rye, vetch, or wheat. This is from 1997. So this isn't a new idea, but to bring it back to NRCS, because they had this big programming, I think no-till has really come to light. There's been incentives for it, there's been education for it. We've known about no-till for a long time. So here's an advantage of why people like no-till in Phytophthora, or this might even just be reduced tillage, right? I mean, maybe you just don't till in your rye cover crop, and what you leave behind is all that mulch, okay, from your nice roller crimping. Then you grow your pumpkins on top of it. Because that fruit does not come into direct contact with the soil, that fruit doesn't get infected. And you didn't have to go out there and spread hay or mulch to prevent it from being in contact with the soil. Okay, another challenge with no-till is yield drag. So this is something that comes up a lot. There is a yield drag, it doesn't always happen, but it's been highly reported as happening, from about the first 3 years where we see yields suppressed. And think of this like a bike gear. You know how if you switch gears, you have to pedal a couple of times before the next gear catches? Yes? Yes? It's like teaching freshmen. Oh, okay. Yes? It's kind of like that. You gotta pedal a couple of times before the next gear catches. There are a variety of reasons for this. I mean, one reason is your soil structure is rebuilding itself. It might not be the nicest place for your plants to live, but we know that if you give it a few years, your compaction will be less than if you consistently till it. But that's a pain, and not every farm operation can tolerate 3 years of yield drag, and I respect that, I understand that. So another thing that happens is increased nitrogen needs and figuring out how much more nitrogen. So why is that? Well, a lot of tillage limits how many microbes are in your soil. So things like bacteria and fungi, which are really important decomposers. When you stop disturbing them and you start feeding them a lot, their communities start to increase. But they're decomposing this carbon that are in those residues. And two things happen. One is the residues might not be giving them enough nitrogen, so they're going to start to compete with the nitrogen that you put down for your crop. And so now they're eating for two, okay? You have to think about fertilizing both your microbes and your cover crop. This does also, again, it turns over in a couple of years. Part of what's happening is just like when you eat food, you assimilate it into your body, right? Like if you eat meat, it becomes protein in your body. When microbes are breaking things down and taking up nitrogen, it becomes a part of their body. And so when those microbes die, their body starts to decompose, again, very metal, okay? And it's going to start to release those nitrogen back for your crop to be able to use it. So these are all things sort of going on in this 3-year drag. And I mean, if you Google this, right, I mean, this kind of cracked me up. LinkedIn, how to avoid nitrogen tie-up in my crop. Since when does LinkedIn care about nitrogen tie-up, right? But, you know, this is a hot topic. And again, if that's going to increase your nitrogen fertilizer costs or your organic and you can't add synthetic nitrogen, it's something to consider. So, with these things in mind, where do you go from here? So when I was a kid, I grew up on reading Rainbow and LeVar Burton, and he would introduce a book, right, and he would tell you it was great, and then he would say, but you don't have to take my word for it. And I think this is a great way to approach, I mean, anything that Extension offers you, right? Don't take our word for it. Try it, right? So first, you can start small. Like anything new that we might try on a farm, put it in one field. It can be a lot to go in and try to do all of your fields at once. And the fact of the matter is, something's going to go wrong the first year, and you're going to learn from that, and that's okay. But you know, start small. And you don't have to go all the way to no-till for there to be value or benefit. If you can go to reduced tillage, you know, shallower tillage, if you can go to permanent beds, I mean, those are all really valuable changes that can be made. So equipment is something that can be really cost prohibitive. I understand that some farms, your model does not rely on equipment, and so that's great. But for people farming at a larger scale, sometimes conservation districts will have no-till equipment that you can borrow. Right now, UMass houses a no-till vegetable transplanter that American Farmland Trust bought, and you can request it from them and try it on your farm. Ask your conservation district, okay, again, if they don't have something you want, like a roller crimper, tell them, please get a roller crimper. They can apply for grants to get those things. Definitely take advantage of NRCS and EQIP funding. So for the non-farmers in the room, NRCS and EQIP funding, it's federal money, and they will pay per acre for things like cover crops or reduced tillage. And this can take some of the heat off of that learning curve or temporary yield suppression. Get good use of that federal money. Set realistic expectations. Year one might be tough, right? Or you might not get good seed to soil contact. If you go in knowing that, it's a real under-promise, over-deliver kind of outcome if things go really smooth the first year. Knowing your farm budget is really important. So if you see your yield go down a little bit, but your labor and your fuel cost are also going down because you're not making so many passes across the field with a tractor, that's a win. But if you don't have good farm records and numbers to be able to see if you're coming out ahead or not, or where you can alter things to help you come out ahead, it's going to be hard to come to that conclusion. So having those numbers and looking at them is really important when evaluating no-till. It's not just yield. Farmer-to-farmer field days. What are you doing on your farm? Workshops, advice. I am not a farmer. I know that. I'm a scientist. I can give you great direction to go in. I hope it's great direction. I'll do my best to give you great direction to go in, but it's talking to other farmers and their experiences that are going to be absolutely the most valuable. Same goes for gardeners, right? Talk to your no-till gardener friends. And last but not least, involvement in research programs. So whether it's UMass doing research programs, American Farmland Trust has been super busy lately. They're doing a lot of no-till veg research. When someone calls you up and says, do you want to do research? Say yes, right? Or if nobody ever calls you, we might not know that you're willing. So call us and say, hey, if you're going to do research, I'm interested, keep me in mind. Something really wonderful you can do is you can write your own farmer grant with Northeast SARE. SARE stands for Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. They are a division of the USDA. They do things like pay for my time to do soil health work. And you can write a grant up to $30,000 to conduct on-farm research. So you do need a research industry sponsor for that. Call me, I'll do it. If it's something that I can't do, like insects, because they keep me out, I'll get you a colleague who can, okay? So don't let that be a barrier to not applying. For my gardeners, this is, vegetable farmers, please don't judge me. This is my fever dream of a no-till vegetable garden, okay? It's a scavenger hunt whenever I want to find anything. But, I do cover crops at home, I do no-till, I do mulching. For gardeners, it's easy to go no-till. When I drive past my neighbors' houses, again, I'm everybody's nosy neighbor, and I see them out there with their rototiller, I'm like, what are you doing, okay? I just want to pull over and prophesize about no-till gardening. But keep in mind, it's easy on a small scale for especially gardeners to go no-till. For all of these reasons, even though it's great for farms, it's not easy. And so be patient, be respectful, be understanding that we're operating at completely different levels than farms are operating at. Okay, so with that, I think I'm on time. Are there any questions that I could answer? I'm looking for the light. Thank you. Before I turn it over to the panel. Yeah.
I just wanted to, am I correct in assuming that the rye crop that is crimped and so forth is preceded by a tillage crop, generally?
Is it preceded by tillage crop? It completely.
Tillage by tillage.
Completely depends. So if that's a dairy farm, for example, a lot of dairy farms have gone full no-till. So there's corn silage that's been chopped off the fields, and then they've used a no-till drill to plant that rye. But on a vegetable farm, if you're coming out of tillage and you can get access to a no-till drill or just roller crimp it, even if you planted it with tillage, great, that's an improvement.
Right, I'm saying there's a lot of different ways to approach.
Oh, there's so many ways to approach, absolutely.
Yeah, so, and as a gardener,
Mhm.
and I want to plant a cover crop,
Mhm.
and I don't have a crimper, are there cover crops that winter kill?
Oh, absolutely. So, well, this closed, but let's see, we'll come back up, doesn't matter. So forage radish or tillage radish will winter kill. Oats will winter kill. I would not recommend planting vetch because it really likes to come back. So I think radish and oats are the most friendly beginner crops. Also peas will winter kill very reliably. And then when you are ready to do an overwintering crop like rye, imagine a classic old school swing, just a board and 2 ropes, right? We all have that in our mind. You hold both ropes, you take that board, and you step behind it, and you become the roller crimper. That is actually how they make crop circles. That's true story.
Who are they?
The aliens. Anything else?
I apologize, I had to step out, but there's a big movement for sheet mulching for gardens, and that's cardboard. I don't know if you spoke to that, did you?
I think about mulching in general, so let's do mulching. Mulching is great. Personally, I have found more success with just heavy leaf mulching than I have with cardboard, so I mulch the heck out of that with leaves. But yeah, cardboard is great, newspaper is great. Whatever you have that's a resource is wonderful. And that will give you weed suppression. It might put you into that category of not having enough nitrogen. So if you do use compost or manure, you might want to up that a little bit to offset as your leaves are breaking down, for example.
Okay.
I assume that as organic matter breaks down, the nutrients that are in that become available to the growing plants.
They do. So as organic matter breaks down into cover crops, the nutrients do become available, but it really depends on if we're talking about something like rye, it has so much carbon in it that it takes a long time for the nitrogen in rye to become available to the crop. Whereas if it's something like radish or peas, it doesn't have very much carbon compared to how much nitrogen it has, so that can become available a lot faster.
It seems almost contradictory though, because in one case, you don't want things to happen fast, in another case, slow might be good.
Yes, so Steve, if you can solve this problem, you will win the researcher of the world. There is so much research right now where people are trying to figure out how do I get that carbon-nitrogen balance just right to give me nitrogen when I want it, based on what my crop is growing. And so they're playing with ratios, they're playing with adding nitrogen, they're playing with timing. I think that's probably one of the biggest problems with cover crop use right now is we don't have that timing worked out.
For a partner who
Yeah.
wants to implement some of these techniques, is there a I loved your reading about,
Oh,
but is there like a slide or a resource that one might go to look at projected timeframes for when to do certain things like crimping and mulching and just kind of guide the process? Because the World Wide Web is crazy and everyone's got opinions, but
It is. I think NOFA, are you familiar with NOFA? The Northeast Organic Farmers Association or Farming Association is not just for farmers, it's also for gardeners. A ton of gardeners go. They have big annual workshops, summer workshops, winter workshops, and then seasonal workshops. And I think they're a really good resource. And you can get access to people, it's like 20 people in a workshop, so you can ask questions. Yeah, you're welcome.
What is that organization again?
NOFA, the Northeast Organic Farming Association, there's a chapter in each state.
I just wanted to mention NOFA has soil health calls that you can zoom into and just ask some questions. And the person that runs it used to run a no-kill call.
thank you so much.
Cool. All right, if anything else comes up, well, I didn't give you my email address, but I will. And then feel free to get in touch with me. I'm happy to answer questions. And thank you, everybody.
Thanks, and Sam, we'll have you come back up at the end for some more questions too. But right now, I'd like to invite our panelists up, Steve from Barrel Farm, Anna from Gaining Ground, and Mark from Saltbox and Honey Nut Farms. And they're gonna tell you a little bit about their tillage experiences on their farms, and then we'll open it up again for lots of questions. If you guys want the microphone, we'll just bring it over in case. See how. Hey.
Who's up?
You.
Well, we do, can you hear me in background?
Yeah, we can see.
We do pretty much conventional tillage. Little variation on it. What I like to do is grow a good heavy cover crop of rye that might be 6 feet in some cases when we plow it under, but at least almost feet. And turn that down to the bottom. And then do real shallow cultivation as much as we can afterwards, just to prepare a fine seed bed on top. And my thinking there is that I like to get the rye incorporated. I've heard talk before that when you loosen the soil, the plant matter gets too much oxygen to it and it breaks down quickly at the surface. And seems to me if you leave your cover on the surface, you're going to enhance that situation. And also growing a lot of the small crops like we do with lettuce and beets and carrots and those things, we like to be able to cultivate very precisely and in a very, very shallow layer. One of my best cultivators is what we call a Williamson cultivator. It has the wires about that long that go out with a little tine down the end, so it's very springy and floppy. And you can adjust the tension on each blade, so it just kind of comes across the ground, just scratching the surface very lightly. And I tell my garden class last Saturday, do that. Do it with a metal leaf rake. After every rain, if you just scratch the surface lightly, you'll allow the soil to dry out on that top layer. And you know, when you plant a seed in your garden, after you plant the seed, usually you pack it in with your hand or your hoe or something. And the reason for that is to get moisture contact with the seed so it'll sprout. And most of your weeds germinate in just the top, maybe ½ inch of soil. So if you can do something to keep that even and dry, you'll kill your weeds before you see them. And that's the best way to do it, not have to tug at them. And the other thing, as Sam mentioned, it's helpful not to have residue for insect and disease control. You can say they balance out, maybe they will. We like to have a clean field. And I feel that if I have the organic matter buried deep and it breaks down slowly, it's like money in the bank, organic matter in the bank. We don't care if it isn't available this year or next year even, it's still there. I don't know, we're moving on. What the other main thing, a lot of our soils are some of the heavier soils, wetter soils, they compact easily. And I think it's important to get that opened up and loosened up in the spring to get some air into the soil. And if we have a good crop of rye, that gives good structure and holds the soil in clods. And I just kind of want to leave it that way as much as we can and just work the top couple inches. And that leaves more room for water accumulation in the soil and air, and root penetration, and your turn. Oh, we're farming, we crop about 150.
Well, all in the contrast with 30 acres. So, hi everyone, my name is Anna Kelklin. I am the farm manager at Gaining Ground Farm, and been there for about 5 seasons. And I started farming in 2012 at Waltham Fields Community Farm, and I'm also working on starting my own farm, Late Bloom Farm in Haverhill, Mass. But Gaining Ground Farm is, for those of you who aren't familiar, we're a nonprofit farm.
We have been some years. Some years.
Yes, so we grow vegetables, herbs, flowers. We have some fruit trees, but we don't take a lot of care of them. But yes, so we grow exclusively for hunger relief, where we donate 100% of what we grow. And we also have thousands of volunteers to the farm about 5 days of the week. And we, our tillage practices really consists of a broad fork and then something that's called a tilther. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but it's basically a mini tiller that disturbs about 1 inch of the soil. So we farm using permanent bed system. The beds are 2.5 feet wide, and then the pathways are 18 inches. So we really strive to minimize the disturbance of the soil as much as possible. Like Sam said, all the life in the soil is what we're trying to preserve. So we see a lot of fungal networks within on our land, which I've been learning help transport water and nutrients. We say we're a no-till farm, but for us, no-till also encompasses the other parts of one of Sam's slide of really maximizing photosynthesis, so trying to have plants growing at all times. So we do a lot of cover cropping. We do, we'll usually put 3 plots of winter rye and crimson clover, which flowers at the same time. So we will do that with a board and rope and crimp it down. We have middle school groups that come and help us with that. But yeah, the timing is really key to crimp that down. Usually for us, it's about the 3rd week of May. We're also using oats and peas and bell beans, barley, tillage radish for tillage. And then we've started using some summer covers like sorghum, Sudan, sun hemp, cowpea mixes. So we're trying to incorporate more cover crop diversity. And then the other special piece of our farm is that we have perennial garden hedgerows strategically placed throughout the farm. So we're trying to really promote biodiversity below and above the ground. So that's where the fruit trees come in, herbs. I'm really trying to focus more on native plants within those, but I think those areas could be more strategically designed if you're on a farm that is selling produce like most farms. That could be more economically beneficial. Yeah, so that's a mini window into our tillage practices.
Hi, I'm Mark. I'm a farm manager at Honey Nut Farm in Hopkinton, but for the past 9 years I've been at Saltbox Farm here in Concord. First up, I just wanted to address the question about like when to plant things. When you had asked about when to plant cover crops, or when to till in cover crops, or not till in cover crops, or whatever the questions are. Another avenue to find information out is to ask a farmer, because I feel like I'm speaking to other farmers. Like, we love to talk about what we're doing. Part of it is there's so much going on. The more we talk about it, the better it's retained in our brains. I have a notepad in my pocket all the time. But I'm practicing now no-till, and I started off as an apprentice at Caretaker Farm in Williamstown, which was a tillage farm, or is a tillage farm. We applied lots of compost and grew amazing produce. We always had cover crops, and I did learn about no-till back then, and I was very like, that's silly. And then came to Saltbox, and working with Ben, the owner, we learned more even through gaining ground about no-till and the science behind it all, and understanding the less disturbance can hold on to more nutrients, and less need for leaving things fallow, and less need for crop rotation, and being able to triple crop even a specific permanent bed, which are things that I'm incorporating now into the farm plan at Honey Nut. But Saltbox Farm is a no-till farm. It's a farm-to-table farm. Many of you, probably all of you, may know about Saltbox Kitchen, farm-to-table restaurant right across the way over here. So we grew all produce for that, for the chefs there, as well as we had a CSA for some years, and we were at farmers markets. I'm now at Honey Nut Farm, so I'm heading more into an educational aspect. We're building a small CSA, but the biggest part is that we're doing these no-till practices as well as permaculture, which is new to me and next level permanent agriculture and food forest. So that's what I'm working on now, and constantly learning. So happy to be here with you all.
Great, thanks. So we can open it up now if folks have questions for the farmers about their practices, or we can address more questions that Sam could probably help answer too, about tillage or about the farms. Yeah.
For a small home garden, where do you find field peas? Which company? I don't need a 50-pound bag of peas, but I'd like to use the field peas as a cover crop. Where do you go to get things that are on a much smaller scale?
I mean, you could use, I'm partial to Johnny's just because I really like the full package of their company. They have great customer service, they have great packaging, very detailed. But I believe you can get 5 and 25 pounds in
Yeah, you can. You can from Johnny?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Another one
You
is,
get less than 5 pounds of peas and foods from John.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's small ones for home gardens.
another one is green cover seeds.
Where's that?
I think they're in the Midwest, so not as local, but you can get like 1 pound of a lot of different types of cover crops.
Johnny's seed catalog actually has a lot of good gardening tips in it too. If you folks haven't seen that. And they specialize in seeds that adapted to New England more than some of the other companies do.
My question's for Mark. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about permaculture and maybe what do you grow using permaculture?
So permaculture is working with nature by design, mimicking what she's doing, what the trees, which trees are attracting which birds that are going to help with which pests or which shrubs or fruit trees or fruit berries or nuts or ground cover. It's finding and learning about all that symbiotic relationships and then basically turning an area into that. And also a huge part of it is capturing water. So there's like various areas around the farm that has drainage built in to like flow with the land, teeter off into various areas. So we have like a mushroom area and potentially fish moving through at some point. And we have a lot of fruit trees, we have a lot of hazelnut trees, chestnut trees, walnut trees, plums, and all the various apple and pears and peaches and things like that. And then like berries, I still don't know them all yet. But yeah, and within those, we're doing all of the row crops as well. But the hope is to create a space. We also have goats for milk to get fats from. And there's an area called the grain belt to grow grain, grow beans, corn, things like that. The goal is to, the owner, David, is everything but the salt. Like just to be able to become a sustainable piece of land. It's a 6.5 acre property. And it takes time, you know, like a lot of the trees are all really small. And I'm actually gonna plant our winter squash in between them this season for space and mulch and things like that.
Cool.
It's been interesting.
Yeah, I think you have one.
Yeah, does anyone have experience, doing weed suppression through heavy mulching? And how did that work out and what did you do?
Yeah. We initially, so Gaining Ground hasn't always been in the no-till state that we practice in. I was there back in 2013 and we used tractors within the fields. So, and then I left for a time, and during that time, the previous manager started making the permanent beds, and he did that by adding like 3 or 4 inches of compost, which basically suppresses, it just buries all the weed seeds, and then like you have to really stay on top of cultivation and weeding. And we're continuing to add compost, but only 1/2 inch to 1 inch. But I have been bringing back the cardboard wood chip mulching a lot in our pathways, and it completely, we don't really have to weed those pathways at all. So that really works for us, but the compost it's a lot of compost and a lot of labor, and it's expensive.
One thing to that, one of our challenges was we applied all the compost and it worked. Like we had these beautiful beets and carrots. We did maybe 1 weeding and it was so fast. And then when we went to harvest, pulling up these roots, we pulled up all of these weed seed. And so that was but we couldn't tend to those beds anymore, so we were over here now, and then we were gonna be over here. And then we needed some more help to get to those. So it's something to definitely be mindful of, to tend to those weeds as soon as you can with the various ways that you can, either solarization or cardboard.
We do it on our rhubarb, spread it very thick in late fall. And now the rhubarb has popped up through it, and there'll be absolutely no weeds for another month or 2, and then some of the perennials will start to poke up through. That's my secret to having rhubarb all season long. We bury it and compost it normally in the fall. And all of a sudden, one warm day, it pops right up.
I was just wondering about the dye in cardboard, you know, if you have cardboard boxes and it has dye in it, do you have to worry about that?
Yeah, we don't use any cardboard that has colored ink, and
So where do you get cardboard that doesn't have?
A really great source is the bicycle stores that I've just learned, because they get a lot of their shipments in just cardboard, and they're really big pieces that are like great to maneuver instead of like a bunch of little pieces.
Huh, that's interesting. I live right up the street from Pebble Power in Acton. Look at that. Yeah. I don't want the bike, I want the box.
I have a question about that. So, a lot of, we work with a lot of cardboard material that's printed with like soy-based ink and vegetable ink that's like biodegradable, compostable, like certified and everything. That's not okay for the gardens that you guys do, or your standards are different, or do you choose not to use that for a reason? The color, are you talking about the colored ink, or? So there are different inks that people use to print on cardboard, and some are like eco-friendly and fully 100% certified compostable by one of the certifying agencies. So I guess my question is, would you choose not to use that because you just don't want additional matter in your beds? Or are you worried about that type of biodegradable ink in your beds? I'm trying to just go deeper on that to understand, because I know that there's a lot of ink that's not, but then there are ink that supposedly is okay. So how did you make that determination?
Yeah, I guess for me, a lot of the cardboard use that I've had was in a hurry. so it's less planning in that way, because it was just, I need to get this down, I need to get this, I'm not gonna have time to cultivate this or move this in any way. Now I'm in the zone of planning, so I'm focused on making sure, because I have to use as much cardboard as possible for the no-till systems.
Right.
So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I have used, cardboard that has had ink that, isn't awesome for the soil, but
Okay.
yeah, do what I had to do.
I talked to another farmer, an amazing farm in Western Mass called Wolbenritz Farm. That's a really successful no-till farm, and was doing some consulting with her, and she told me she never uses colored ink, and I just went with that. But I also have cut it out and just stripped the top off as well.
Okay.
But I am curious about, there's so many different kinds of cardboard and glues, and it is probably something to look deeper into. Thanks.
Just on that, so to the best of my knowledge, there's a big difference between colored inks and black inks. The black inks for years have been mostly soy-based or vegetable-based. Colored inks have all sorts of chemicals, and to make color, you need to use a variety of chemicals. So I think you mentioned you don't use colored cardboard, and that's the reason primarily. You can go online, there's quite a bit of research online about using cardboard. And years ago, black inks were not soy-based, and they actually were poisonous. And it was in the newspaper business that caused the problems, and they had to switch to soy-based ink. So that goes back 20 years.
Yeah, Brian?
I think one simple answer for some people is that certifying agencies don't allow, if you're organic, you're not supposed to use colored inks, whether it be in newspapers or cardboard or other print. So.
What do you do weeding like beets and carrots? Can you use a hand cultivator, or do you do it all by hand?
We'll go through by hand one time, maybe two, and we'll use gosh, I can't even think of the name right now.
Scuffle?
Not a scuffle home, a wire weeder. Yeah.
I'm curious about, I know Anna and Mark, and I would love to hear you talk about sort of your connection to the philosophy of no-till. So even beyond just like the scientific soil health aspects, but the way that no-till practices can welcome in a different way of sort of approaching how you relate to land and how you relate to the life around you on the farm.
It's a beautiful question.
Well, always learning. It's the name of the game as humans here. I feel like even with pests such as like moles, listening to what's going on and connecting not as a person lording over everything, but one with the land, you can start to feel that things are coming together, and it's not all up to me to make sure things resolve. And I think that goes to Sam's point about eventually things will equal off if we alter things in a specific way. Similar with permaculture. But I did notice over the years at Saltbox, like lots of spiders, like very spiders. So yeah, and being one with, I mean, any farmer, maybe they call it something different, but they walk by a patch of some crop and they see some, sagging leaves or discoloration or something. And they're quickly in tune with that, and maybe their brain goes to like, all right, what could it be? But also, what could it be? What are they feeling? What are they around? What are they listening to constantly? And there is a nurturing aspect in there as well. I'm germinating seedlings with grow lights, and it's all new to me, but I find myself speaking to them more now than ever. and I even might start playing some music. So I think there's a lot of reality to those things, whether or not we're fully conscious of it on a moment-to-moment basis.
Yeah, wow, that was really well said, and I relate a lot to that. I would add, just for myself, there's that intimacy that, or more connectedness that you're physically closer to the plants rather than, obviously, by gaining ground, we still use a tractor, we're using it to bring compost around, but most of the time we're closer to the earth physically, which I think allows us to be more observant and maybe more receiving of what nature has to teach, and noticing more of like, okay, what's like, if there's a pest here, like this is a symptom that's like of a deeper issue that's going on, and being more, or maybe more awareness. There's a lot more there, but it's like my bedtime right now.
Yeah, there's a couple more questions. Yeah, go ahead.
One of you mentioned the broad forking, which I use as well. Do you broad fork just at the beginning of the season, or you get an end, or what's your practice for using the broad fork? One of you mentioned that.
We use a broad fork, usually one time on each bed. Some of the plots don't really need it. I'm a little fearful not to do it, but you can notice like some are just way fluffier, but we do it on every bed. usually just one time, but depending on if a field is much more compacted, we might do it again, because we're planting everything at least twice, like 2 generations, sometimes 3, sometimes 4, so we are flipping beds quite often.
Could you talk a little bit to your process of flipping beds mid-season? Like if you're switching between crops, how you remove what was there to plant something new in the no-till process?
Me or?
What was the question?
Sorry. Yeah, so, it depends on what crop was there, but for example, with greens, like arugula or kale mix, lettuce mix that we're growing in the high tunnel right now, we just harvested all of them, primarily Maddie, on Tuesday, and that cuts pretty low to the ground, and then we put a silage tarp on it, and this was in a tunnel, so we're closing the sides and then hoping it will be sunny for the next week, and so having that down for a week and a half should kill that, and then we'll go through Broad Fork. Well, maybe we don't Broad Fork with that, because we already did. We'll put compost down, fertilizer, compost, and then we'll plant our cucumbers directly into that. But it depends. If it's carrots, obviously they're harvested and then it's a free bed to direct seed in or transplant. With something like lettuce, we'll harvest the lettuce head as normal, leave the roots in the ground, and then either direct seed in between, or transplant something that's like 2-row. Trying to think of other scenarios, but we do use silage tarps, and generally they're down for like at least 3 days in July. That should kill everything. I haven't used solarization as much, but I'm curious about it.
Yeah, I'm working with that now. With the cloudiness, it's taken a little bit longer than the usual, like 7 to 14 days, but message me and I'll let you know.
Yeah, we probably have time for another question or two if people want, and then you can always talk to the panel. We'll be around. Folks will be around for a few minutes afterwards. Yeah, Carmela.
Is there like a regulatory body to come to your farm, and do you have to be certified as no-till? Do they have to look at your implements? Can you just call yourself no-till?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any body of certain.
So you just kind of know what.
Which goes to that whole hashtag know your farmer, go and visit and get your hands dirty for a moment, or ask if you can have a tour, and then you learn what they're doing, what they're working on, and as long as they're, I don't know, just open to do that with you, then you can feel pretty good about what their practices are, what they're working on.
And also that it, like Sam really drove home, it's such a continuum. There's farms that are no-till that are really they have permanent bed systems. Brian O'Hara in Connecticut is a really good example of that. I forget his farm name, but there's so many ways to be no-till or reduced till, and to really focus on the life in the soil.
It's more of a spectrum.
Yeah, there's no you're no-till or you're not. It's I mean, we're tilling because we grow potatoes and we have to dig them up. So that is tillage.
Great, well, thanks everybody, thanks Mark. And thanks for coming. Thank you.